Santa Cruz, a bi-weekly program on KSQD 90.7 FM with alternating hosts Jean Kratzer and Matilda Rand. My name is Jean, and today's program explores the San Lorenzo River. From its headwaters in Castle Rock State Park, the San Lorenzo River flows south-southeast through the San Lorenzo Valley, the city of Santa Cruz, and out into Monterey Bay. This river was known to Native Americans long before the Spanish gave it their name. But this is not a history program. Though threads of history do run through it, it's more like a small patchwork quilt stitched from different views and experiences of the river. And you are invited to add your patches to the quilt by sharing your own experiences of the river on my programmer's blog at ksqd.org.
A river so ancient, in darkness she stirs, an atom of consciousness, a whisper of time.
People of the San Lorenzo River from before colonial times are still here. They're landless, but they're still here. At the time of European contact, we know there were at least 50 individual tribes that compose what we call the Ohlone cultural sphere. At Wilder Ranch, you had the Whippany. At Davenport, you had the Cotoni. Further up here along the river by Scotts Valley, you had the Sayant tribe, and of course that's where the word Zayanti comes from. And then in downtown, you had the Apto or Aptos, and then Choquel, and so forth. All of these were landholding groups. My name is Mark Hylkema. I am the Santa Cruz District Archeologist for California State Parks. I'm also tribal liaison in our district, and that means I interact with the Native Americans who are still here. The river used to support large migrations of salmons and steelhead, and when the runs went on, the people from opposite sides of the river would meet here to harvest. And there are all kinds of rituals that go with hunting and gathering. So even when fishing, making a net or a basket trap for the fish, you have to be spiritually clean so that you don't create an offense to the creatures that you're harvesting.
How would they have caught their fish?
It depends where you are on the river. At the mouth of the river, you're going to use harpoon. The salmon are so numerous, you could just grab them, and you never took more than you needed. Further up, like where we are, you use basket traps. We do have archaeological sites up and down the river, a lot of fishing camps, tool processing sites, but what we don't have are mortuary sites, burial grounds. They're a fiber-based people. You're making basketry, cordage, feather capes, beautiful things, but they don't preserve in the ground. So our vision of what Native people were doing is biased. In baskets, think of all the things pots are used for. Baskets are the substitute, and that means you need the materials. It's not just enough to gather the materials. You have to make the plant useful, so they'll prune them. And so we're looking at a landscape that wasn't a wilderness at all. It was a very managed garden. With a small hunting territory, 10 by 10 square miles, you have to blend in. That means the men are generally not wearing clothes because clothing holds the human scent. There are sweat lodges along the riverbank where men go to remove the human scent and to pray for taking the life of an animal. All of this activity is going on along the river. So the archaeology is basically, sad to say, it's the stones and bones. And that's why I say permanent residences weren't along the river. But they all come to the river because of the resources it contains. It's the life force that draws them.
The next voice you will hear is that of Alex Ramiriz. Alex is a Native American who bears his father's name. Alex is reading from an interview that his late father gave to Beverly Ortiz. When the reading mentions mother and grandfather, these are in fact the grandmother and the great-grandfather of Alex the reader.
My name's Alex Ramiriz. I'm Rumsien-Ohlone and the son of Alex Ramiriz. And I would like to read... Take
your time.
Sure. Like I was saying, I remember when my father received this. And prior to this, he had never told us about this. So my brother and I, when he first shared it with us, it was quite amazing for us to hear this for the first time. And then he played the tape, and that was really quite amazing to hear something from our past. So I'd like to read this now. When I was about 4, 5, or 6 years old, my mother used to take me down by the river, and she would say, "Listen to the water." Then I would listen to the water. When we were going home, we'd be walking under the trees. You can hear the rustle of the leaves in the trees, and my mother would say, "Listen to the wind." Then I would listen to the wind. When we got home, I would sit around this big old wood stove with a fire glowing inside, and she would say, "Listen to the fire." Whatever my mother said to do, I did. But what then? Why do I have to listen to the water? More than a half a century later, I heard a recording from the Smithsonian Institution. My grandfather, Manuel Onissimo, is talking to anthropologist John Peabody Harrington. John Harrington came to Monterey area in the early 1930s, interviewing a lot of Indian people. My grandfather says something to John Harrington about a song about the water. John Harrington says, "What does a song about the water say?" But my grandfather says, "No, it's not about the water. It is the water singing the song." The water says, "I am very strong. If you put a stone in my path, I will roll it out of the way. If you put a tree across my way, I will wash it out of the way. If you put a mountain in front of me, I'll cut through it." Oh, my father says, this is what the water says. That is why I was supposed to listen. Water is our life. Air is our life. Fire is our life. That's my experience as an Indian child. I'm not ever going to wear a feather on my head, but I'm still Indian, and the things that I learned are still within me.
What did that feel like to read your father's words about your grandmother and your great-grandfather?
I can imagine him as a child standing by the river and just sitting there listening. He said his mom would wear moccasins. I can imagine him walking with the moccasins, listening and trying to figure out what he's listening to.
Tom Hogye, president of the Santa Cruz Fly Fishermen. It's really just a fun organization committed to enjoying the sport of fly fishing, conservation and preservation of our wild habitats, and teaching young and old alike. There are a lot of people who want to live here. There's only so much water, and some of our years lately have been really strong low water years. There are a number of sources. We do have the aquifers, but the city's primary source of the water supply is the San Lorenzo River. We had the flood of '55, which was very destructive. So the Corps of Engineers came in and stripped the lower river, straightened it out, and put a big levee up there to prevent flooding of the downtown area. And that changed the landscape. There was a lot of debris in the river, and people were worried about the river flooding again and causing much more damage upriver. So they cut all the wood out of the river that was really good wood habitat for the fish and held stream banks. And then people started building houses along the river and stripping the vegetation away. That really started to happen in the 50s. But I suppose you could go further back, even the early 1900s, when we were logging this entire area. I mean, this whole area was pretty well clear-cut for building San Francisco and building the communities around us. And the river then, up until the 40s, was really a waterway for carrying wood. There was a lot of destruction then, but the river recovered because their water was there. And it wasn't until really the 70s when the water really started to drop. My job is to raise awareness that this river used to hold some really big salmon and steelhead, and then to kind of encourage people why they should care. Because, I mean, really, it's just a fish. But I think that if the fish can't live here, it's like the canary in the coal mine. If the fish can't live here, we've just used more water than we should have used. Maybe we can start to develop some of the waterways where during a storm the water just doesn't rush into a storm drain and run out to the ocean, but it has a chance to permeate into the ground and into the aquifer. It's expensive. Asphalt's really cheap. We have to find a way to budget for natural water catchment. Plantronics is a great one. They're parking areas, and where the water flows, it flows into kind of a natural, permeable surface, so the water has a chance to soak in rather than just run into a storm drain and out to the ocean. The city of Santa Cruz uses about 6 million gallons of water per day. Most of that water comes from the San Lorenzo River and from the aquifer, but they dispense with about 6 or 7 million gallons of water per day because it goes into the sanitation department and then was pumped out to the ocean. So it'd be kind of nice if we could do something different with that water.
Tell me about the joys of fly fishing.
It's pretty peaceful. It's a great way to get away.
When you've caught a fish, can you take it home and eat it?
Some, but I generally don't. When you talk about the San Lorenzo River and you talk about steelhead and coho salmon, they're too precious a fish to just catch once because that fish grows up in this river. It has to survive the throngs of people and all the crud that gets thrown into the river from the time it hatches as a little tiny smolt to the time it goes out into the river, maybe late October, when there's enough run in the water and it somehow genetically senses that it's time to go. They go out into the ocean, and they live in the ocean in a column of water about 15 feet deep. So they have to survive there. Harbor seals, sea lion, merganser, cormorant, pelican, whales, orcas, people. They have to survive all that. And then somehow they know to come back to the same river. They can travel thousands and thousands of miles, and that they know to come back to the San Lorenzo River sometime October, November, December, January, and raise a family. And that fish goes back out to the ocean. It's not like a salmon. It doesn't die. A steelhead can return several times. So when you catch a fish that's 10, 15 pounds, that fish may have come back already 3, 4, 5 times. So to kill a fish like that, it just doesn't make sense to me. The fishermen are the stewards of the river. We are the people that have the opportunity to tell other people why it's so important that there is water in this river. Because these fish, these creatures who have lived here for millennium, it's their home. We're destroying their home.
How would you change people's awareness?
Teach them about fly fishing.
My name's Meg Seibert. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project. I'm working on relaunching our STEP program, short for Salmon and Trout Education Program. It's a K-12 science curriculum to use in the classroom and outdoors in the local creeks and streams. The kids are learning to take temperature of the water, of the air. They're using water chemistry kits. They're getting wet in the creek, calculating volume and flow. There are about 8 species of aquatic insects that are not only food for trout, but they are indicators of the water health. The kids collect these insects and then rate the health of the creek. We have teachers from Santa Cruz County, Monterey County, and Santa Clara County, serving more than 750 children this year. We had a permit to rear steelhead and distribute some of those eggs to classrooms so that the kids could hatch the fish and then release them into area creeks and streams.
They were just mesmerized. I think one of my sons might have been 8 years old and the other might have been 3 years old.
That's Richard Tejeda.
And I'm the lead trainer for the Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project.
Richard's 2 sons were part of the STEP program.
From the time that we took the steelhead rainbow trout fry from the tank, and them counting them, and then us going down and putting a bubbler in there to provide oxygen, dissolved oxygen for them, they got to learn about that, and then that's how they breathe. And then taking them down to the San Lorenzo River, and then putting that steelhead rainbow trout fry in a cup. They watch it, they observe it, and then they release it into the San Lorenzo River, and then they watch what that steelhead rainbow trout fry does. Is it just going to hang out there to school up with the other trout that were released? And so they just really, really got into it, and it's something that my kids will remember for the rest of their lives.
In 2014, the Department of Fish and Game told us we were no longer allowed to distribute eggs. The steelhead became a threatened species, and genetic studies determined that from a small tissue sample, they can tell what stream that trout was born in, and that's the stream that the steelhead will return to. So we can't have teachers and kids releasing these young fish in any old stream or pond. Out at sea, a magnetic compass system in their heads directs the steelhead back towards their native stream. If conditions aren't optimal for spawning, they will not migrate up that stream and they'll find a neighboring stream. They can tell if there's too much silt or sand on the bottom to be able to lay eggs. They can tell if the stream has been polluted. Some years ago in the Pajaro River, a farmer drove his tractor into the creek to wash it after it had been spraying pesticides in the fields. And that one incident wiped out the entire population of steelhead trout in the Pajaro River. Both the coho salmon and the steelhead, they are used to having floodplain areas inundated where they have side pools. In Northern California, they are creating these side channels, but it requires moving roads, moving homes back away from the banks.
Kind of a big ask.
Right.
What's feasible?
I think a backyard assessment, and that's something that we might be asking the school kids to do as a plant more native species, plant species that aquatic insects like because that provides more food. If you have a stream or a river flowing through your property, plant vegetation along the banks to provide shade. Having cooler water is very important for the fish that are migrating. And try not to build things that would impede their migratory path, such as piling up rocks to make your own private swimming pool. If you see an area of a stream drying up and you know that there's trout in it that are going to die, you can call our organization and we can arrange a fish rescue operation.
My name's Elijah Pfotenhauer. I'm a muralist, artist, graphic artist, comic artist, teacher, born here in Santa Cruz, and then in high school, I would go down to the river, bring friends. We'd be down there, like, hanging out, lighting off fireworks, drinking beers, and just skipping rocks and all that good stuff. This was, like, the early 2000s. I remember way back, as, like, a little kid, back at the San Lorenzo River Park. I remember, like, face paint, blowing bubbles and all that stuff, and just being, like, a kid in the 80s in Santa Cruz and that river, and it looked different then. There was a lot more plants in it, and I feel like I saw a lot more animals living in it. I remember then they changed it in the late 90s. They like raised the river, graded it up higher, and then they started chopping down all the trees. Still see some cool birds and stuff along there. I remember seeing 2 white owls doing like a double helix along the river one night. That was pretty cool. Some hawks. I've seen seals swim all the way up into downtown. I was hanging out on the levee one night talking to a friend and hear this like sound. We're like, what is, somebody's drunk down there, and like, what's going on? And then realize it's a seal like just swimming by. I live at the tannery now, and that's along the river, and we have all kinds of wildlife. It feels like every summer there's a new sound of some animal that you hear at night. At first it sounded like ducks, then it sounded like possums, then it sounded like ducks being killed by possums. Then there were bullfrogs. In the last summer there was something that sounded like a monkey, but I think it was some sort of bird. Also, I remember my high school years, I was like hanging out at the time with a bunch of graffiti writers, and they were showing me all the spots along the river, and really just all the bridges in town used to have a lot more art on them. I know it was illegal or unsanctioned art, but it's kind of awesome because it was these spots that not a lot of people hung out, and later I was doing that too, and I liked that things were a little more wild in that way because it's still going to go on. It's just has less space now.
Would you be happy if the city decided that all the bridges could be painted with murals?
Yeah, for sure. I like the idea of getting art on more of these surfaces. Yeah.
See that little bird right next to the mallard? That little pipe-billed grebe?
Yeah.
He's just totally convinced he should be together with them. It's kind of like, I think I'm a mallard. I'm Jane Mio, and I am the lead for the Estuary Project, sponsored by the City of Santa Cruz. It is a Valley Women's Club project. We are working with the downtown street team and community volunteers, and we're making a change along the levee. The river is divided into 3 sections, 3 very specific micro systems here. From the river mouth all the way up to Laurel Street Bridge is the estuary, which has the highest salt water content. Then transitional, it's mixed, fresh water and salt water. And then from there to the Highway 1 is the Riverine stretch, which is then totally fresh water. There they are. Those are the spotted sandpipers. They're little shorebirds. Something flushed them out. That's the other thing. When you listen to the sounds, you can pretty much tell what's going on. When that high-pitched repeated call comes from a bird, that's alarm sound. When a hawk is starting to circle, you will hear one bird start giving high alarm sounds, and then you see everybody dash into the bushes. Oh, look, a merganser. They're fish eaters.
Which suggests that there are some fish down there.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't see that many cormorants sitting in the trees over there. You wouldn't see the great blue heron if there wasn't fish.
What kind of fish?
We have the steelheads, and then we have bluegill, then the sardines that come in from the ocean. I think that people should be so proud of this river. There's quite a rich bird life, and there's snakes and salamanders and lizards and coyote, and once in a while a weasel. There are owls, bunnies. We have this richness of wildlife. My ideal vision is that this is a passive river. You look and you enjoy it, and you don't interfere with nature. I would like to see, well, no building along the river or at the 1-story high, but making that compromise of 5 stories is workable. It will make a change for birds when all of a sudden that building height is there. I hear the kingfisher. They're amazing. You know, it's just about every time they come up with a fish, it's like, whoa, you're good. Also, we have ravens here. Now, I like ravens more than crows. You know, ravens, they have this incredible vocabulary and nuances. It's just stunning. And it's almost, when you listen to them, you can tell what they're talking about.
That was fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like you're talking about your family, your uncles, your aunts, your kids, your grandkids.
Isn't it actually like that? When you see an animal and you interact with an animal, doesn't it become part of your family? Or, in the crow's case, the uncle you don't like?
My name is Greg Pepping. My title is Executive Director of the Coastal Watershed Council. Our vision is a healthy river that has fish and birds and wildlife in it, and the Santa Cruz Riverwalk as a destination. A lot of communities wish they had a river. We have a river and we've turned our backs on it. Our history is tied to the river, and for some people they connect to the river. For some people they have a negative association with the river. Our vision is having the river integrated into people's daily lives. A couple of things that are in the way is that we have a levee system. In December of 1955, the Christmas flood really changed our relationship with the river. The levees changed our relationship with the river. So the levees are doing their job. They're keeping the water of the river in their banks. And they also visually disconnect us from the river, physically disconnect us, emotionally, spiritually. So one of the things in the way are the levees, but they're not going anywhere. One of the other things in the way is the city of Santa Cruz owns that property. So the river is not their top priority. We wish it was. When we've looked at what's successful for thriving riverfronts in other places, we've seen there's a partnership between the city or the county and a nonprofit like the Coastal Watershed Council. And the magic ingredient is someone who lives near the river. It's all of us. What we're talking about here is going from a negative or a neutral space to a positive space. People at the river is how we drown out the negative. And it's an urban river, so that does include people. That's controversial as well. When you ask about the transition of the river from a back alley to a front yard, one of the things that needs to change is land use next to the river. The downtown plan has been amended so that you can't turn your back on the river. So along Front Street, which is one part of the river right next to downtown, if you were going to build something there, you can't turn your back on the river. That's the way the buildings are now. That's kind of a back alley feel. If we were walking there right now, that's what we'd experience. The river's really beautiful, and then you turn around and you're looking at the back of a building, and it's not very inviting. There'll be multiple story buildings there. There'll be residential up top, and there'll be some retail or a restaurant or a cafe or a coffee shop. From Front Street, the second floor would be ground level from the levee. So they will backfill that slope, and you can walk from the levee path, just walk over to some of those businesses or to your home. So that's one of the things that needs to change. And then we're focused on program, and that means water quality monitoring, protecting habitat, engaging volunteers for that, and specifically bringing a lot of kids to the river. We want people to know there's a role they can play in building that future. One of my favorite spaces is up by the tannery. It's really quiet, and there are a lot of trees there. The river mouth is a dynamic place. Crossing the pedestrian bridge from San Lorenzo Park to Trader Joe's, we've actually petitioned City Council to consider renaming it the Chinatown Bridge, because it's a beautiful recognition of Chinatown, which was right across the river over by where the theater was. Much of the community doesn't know that we had a Chinatown, and that's where it was. You know what I like is looking down into the river, and occasionally I'll see fish. I've seen turtles, lots of geese and ducks and other birds. And then I like watching people watch the river. My message to the public is go to the river and spend time there. So go to the river and get involved is what I would say.
We owe our existence to the river. It flows through us. It births our cells, our blood, our memory. When we dry up a river, a part of us shrivels and dies also.
Thank you for listening to Exploring Santa Cruz and the episode on the San Lorenzo River with your host, Jean Kratzer. The opening and closing poetry was written and read by Diana Hobson. It's but a brief excerpt from a wonderful multimedia production about the San Lorenzo River. You'll find Diana's full description and text, along with links to the longer versions of all of the interviews, on my blog at ksqd.org. If you enjoyed this program, please support KSQD 90.7 FM, your Santa Cruz community station.